Hi, this is Brock Yorty. We are live at the South Atlantic Drilling Jubilee. This is the last day. We're going to hear rigs start up. Folks are starting to go home. And this is the Driller Newscast, a weekly update on the news and stories impacting the groundwater, the geothermal, and the drilling industry. I'm your host, Brock Yorty, and I have my favorite person in the world at the Driller. Mind you, I'm married to the publisher, and that is our editor, Sammy Hagar. How did you feel about this conference, and what was your experience for your first time?
It was incredible. The community, the people, just the energy, seeing all of these young future drillers just on the showroom floor, getting to see what their dads and their moms do for a living. That is so cool. I had a wonderful time. And honestly, my favorite part was just getting to meet everybody.
I really enjoyed seeing so many young men and women at this conference, professionally developing, coming together. And then the kids, water well industry, we are rocking it. And this was such a great conference. I think one really big piece to this conference that we need to think about is we have our year-end conference in December. And that's a lot of fun. And we're getting ready to end the year and we want to see how our business, but hey, it's the last week of July right now. We're at the Jubilee. Obviously, you're going to see this in the first week of August, but November 5th is coming fast. And if we're not together talking about these policies impacting the drilling industry, we're in trouble. What did you see in the conferences while you were here?
There were so many incredible sessions talking about everything from the legal issues that this industry is facing to even just how to market your brand better, how to reduce employee turnover. That's such a huge topic. And everybody's asking, how do I get these young people in the door? How do I get them happy about this industry? And how do I let everybody in this industry know what matters in news and what they should be really fighting for in their local communities?
That's it, everybody. This isn't about donkeys and elephants. It is 100% about who is backing groundwater and environmental quality, how we treat our executive branch agencies. There's some big pieces happening right now. And this isn't about a presidential election. This is about our boots on the ground local folks onto our state level and our national level in Congress. So that's who we're trying to talk to right now. Our feature this week is going to be Jesse Richardson. He is one of two East Coast water lawyers. When they come together, those 50 lawyers, for their discussions on water quality and environmentalism every year, there's 50 of them, and only two come from the East Coast. He's going to drop some great knowledge. You have to get down to this conference. I got one last question for Sammy. Sammy, did you get to ride a camel?
I did get to ride a camel. It was a life-changing experience, I would say. I don't want to go too crazy about it, but I had a really good time. And Chelsea actually took photos and videos of me, and I was like, wow, I feel like my mom is taking photos and videos of me right now. I am not a child, but I had a good time.
We may need to sneak in a video of Sammy riding the camel.
No, please no, but I had a good time.
Let's get to this interview with Jesse Richardson. Hi, this is Brock Yorty live at 2024 South Atlantic Drilling Jubilee, and we got our favorite legal scholar, water advocate, water systems council guru, Jesse Richardson. Jesse, go ahead and introduce yourself and what you do, and then we'll get into some hot button topics.
All right, sure. I'm Jesse Richardson, and I'm a professor at West Virginia University College of Law. And I'm also the legal advisor for Water Systems Council. So I do water rights and water issues all across the country.
Did you think this is what you would be doing with your career right now?
I did not, and it all kind of happened by accident. I was practicing law in my hometown of Winchester, Virginia, and the widow of a former law partner contacted me and had a water problem. It was a really high visibility case, and I represented her, and it was like a set of dominoes falling, and here I am.
So now at West Virginia University, do you see a lot of young professionals like getting into this environmental and water, and like how has this picked up over the years in the importance of what we do day to day for, litigation?
Oh, it's been amazing. I mean, water's always been a hot issue in the West. But in the East, when I had this case 30 years ago, I couldn't get anybody at the State Department of Environment to pay attention to me. Now, a lot of young people are into it. States are regulating it more in the East. Water is much more scarce than it used to be in the East, and the demands are higher.
When you did that first case and kind of did what the drilling industry, the water industry always does, and that's grab you and bring you into something, how long ago was that?
30 years ago.
So
That really ages me, doesn't it?
no, but if we think about it, West Virginia, 30 years ago is Parkersburg and PFAS.
Yeah.
You look at what we had for water quality, you look at across the country, you can Google things on the Western United States water and California, and you can find a study from 2007 that says it looks like we have a nice abundant amount of water for the San Joaquin Valley. And here we are in 2024, and
Yeah, no more abundant water.
no, climate change has changed that quite a bit. So Jesse is one of few individuals like me that ends up reading every brief that comes out, and he, with his brilliance, gets to help write some of these and some responses. And so we at the Newscast have covered some of these discussions. And first, I want to talk about Texas versus New Mexico, which we talked about. What did you see out of that case?
Well, that was, I think, a surprise for at least some people. And Texas versus New Mexico has been going on for 10 years now. And way back, I think probably 6 years ago, the United States Supreme Court allowed the federal government to intervene in the case because it's odd because New Mexico delivered the water not to the state line, but to Elephant Butte Reservoir, which is a federal project. And so the court said, federal government, you can get in. Now, fast forward 6 years, and finally, New Mexico and Texas reached an agreement. And they said, we're going to move forward. It was kind of a, like all agreements. It was good for Texas because now they measured the water at the Texas line, at the state line. It was good for New Mexico because they retained the groundwater pumping levels from the 1970s, 1980s, instead of 1938. Instead of the groundwater pumping levels from 1938, which of course were much lower. And so they agreed, but now the federal government said, whoa, wait a minute, we don't like this agreement, and went back to the special master. Special master studied it and said, hey, we only let the United States in because they represented Texas, really. Everybody that really agrees now, so I think we should approve the settlement. Went up to the United States Supreme Court, and in a 5-4 decision, the court said, no, we can't allow this to be settled until the United States government agrees. So now we're back to square one.
It's hard because New Mexico, as one of our states in the union, is very depressed. There's a lot of water issues happening there. And we look at the Navajo Nation, and we look at the state of Arizona, we look at the Colorado River, and we know for a fact that New Mexico and Texas aren't getting the water that they're supposed to out of the Colorado Compact. And that's 1.5 million acre feet. And this debate is over 66,000 acre feet for irrigation and citrus farmers. This isn't exactly impacting rural water, right?
It's impacting agriculture mostly, yeah. Well, I mean, at the center point, and you kind of alluded to this is all about groundwater pumping. The allegations of Texas is that New Mexico is allowing water wells to go in along the river, and that's taking water from the river that should go down to Texas. I would say most of these wells are probably agriculture, probably a few domestic wells, but it's really about agriculture.
And for me, Texas is a big state. It's got a lot of House seats. And this is a big topic to directly recognize groundwater pumping impacting a supply of a river. So moving beyond that, what else is going on? Because this Chevron doctrine, now deference, that was part of 40 years, over 7,000 cases. Can you give us a dummies like this ambiguous, unambiguous? Why are these agencies suddenly that had been bringing roundtables together, asking for discussions, questions, comments? We just haven't had the laws. Whose fault is it we're here right now?
Oh gosh, that's a good question, and it depends on who you ask. But yeah, probably the most talked about case in the latest Supreme Court term is the case that looked at the Chevron test. And what we're talking about is Congress passes a law, and then they delegate authority to a federal agency like the EPA, for example, to administer that law. And of course, Congress can't put in a law everything. So there are gaps. And so the agency passes a regulation, and somebody disagrees with the regulation. Maybe it's an industry group, maybe it's an environmental group.
Maybe it's a house that wants to be on Priest Lake.
Yes, and so they challenge that regulation, and it gets to the court, and the question is, how much deference does the court give to the agency interpretation? And 40 years ago, the United States Supreme Court said, well, here's how we're going to do it. Step one, because we always start with, what did Congress say? And if Congress has already spoken to it, then that's the end of the story. But if Congress hasn't spoken to it, what do we do? And 40 years ago, the court said, we're going to defer to the agency because they're the experts. And if the agency interpretation is reasonable, doesn't have to be the best interpretation in the court's opinion, just if it's reasonable, then we're going to defer to it. And in the Loper-Bright case this past term, the court said, all of that was wrong. We shouldn't have done that. And we're going to change. And now, of course, if Congress speaks to it, we're going to stick with what Congress said. If they don't, then we're not going to give deference. We're going to give respect to whatever the agency decision is.
So the Loper case is about inspectors on fishing boats. The initial Chevron doctrine was on Chevron versus the National Resource Defense Council on drilling in Alaska.
It was air quality.
Oh, it was air quality.
Yeah,
Okay.
How do we...
It was how do you define a pollutant?
Yeah, well, no, it was how do you define a stationary source? Do you just look at one smokestack, or do you look at a whole... Like if I have a factory that has 5 buildings, do I look at all 5 buildings, or do I just look at one of them?
And so here we are with talking air quality, and I had always assumed Chevron, it was on the oil drilling side, but no, now I understand the processing. We have translated that into observation or oversight of fishing,
Yeah, yeah.
and suddenly water quality. And there's a lot of laws that Congress has to pass. We want them to just pass the USDA bill, the Farm Bill, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That hasn't been passed since 2018. And now we're saying, hey, by the way, and all the rest of the things happening in the country right now, do you have time to make these laws?
Yeah, and you ask at first who's to blame for this. One view that you could take was, well, if Congress speaks to it, we're not sitting here right now. But the odds of Congress passing something comprehensive right now is pretty slim, I think.
There's just a lot happening. There's a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
of inner workings. So if I dumb this down and I'm throwing a curveball at you, EPA, Nixon starts the EPA after we send astronauts into space, getting ready for this moon mission, and we can see that there is environmental impact to water quality and air quality. And then we have Cuyahoga River catch on fire, and suddenly we say there needs to be an environmental protection agency. Where is the balance? Like if every rule that is put together that is based on this idea, no different than OSHA or our regulatory agencies bring in roundtables. They ask for comments. It's a 9 to 18-month process to come up with a rule. It's not like the dang agency said, nope, this is what's going to happen. The fishing oversight came from calls for comments and how do we get here? I don't understand how we can't have an agency that's trying to help us. So obviously, there's some steering that needs to be done, and that agency is appointed by the president and the cabinet, right?
Well, it depends. EPA is a little different, but a lot of times Congress will create the agency in the statute, and that's the issue. The Constitution sets out our three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Agencies are just this made-up thing that tries to help out. And so when Congress passes a law, they can't do everything. So they say, we're going to delegate this to this agency that we created to implement the law. And that agency is a creature of Congress. And so if Congress doesn't give them any authority, they don't have any. And that's where we are. It's like, okay, Congress gave you some authority, agency, but how much? Did they give you the authority to define waters in the United States as including isolated water bodies? And so you look at the legislation and see, did they or didn't they?
Yeah, and then the argument is a mud puddle, which is what our Supreme Court justice said, right? Like a mud puddle is not the same as, a wetland, as the same as a navigable water. And so the last piece I want to jump into, you've been down here, there's a lot of things going on. Last year we celebrated this idea that Georgia passed laws on the idea, laws, everybody, not an agency coming in, that if you have an acre or more of land, you can have a private water well. How has that been going for the rest of the states and the success?
There's been, lately, we've got a lot of mandatory hookup issues. A lot of local governments and even states at this point are trying to force homeowners to connect to public water. And they might use as the vehicle for that to say, uh-oh, we've got PFAS contamination. That means you have to hook to public water. Or they might try some other angle. And even, I'll tell you a little anecdote about Georgia. There are some local governments in Georgia who are basically ignoring that state statute. and still trying to require mandatory connection.
So working in municipal water and seeing rural water systems, a few years ago, 2022, when Governor Newsom in California, mind you, we're on the East Coast at the Atlantic Jubilee, said we need to cut our water by 10%. And then they came back a couple months later and said, we can do it again. We're going to be in a really good place. California needed to cut 3 million acre feet. They're trying to capture 1.5 million stormwater acre feet. They have funding for this. Then they came back a third time and said, we need to do it. And the municipality said, if you cut us again, we no longer have an operating budget. So for a rural system to say we need mandatory hookups, it's about maintaining the system-wide network. But at the same time, as we've talked about PFAS, that municipal system isn't testing for PFAS. But now we're saying test a private water well for PFAS, and if you have it, you need to hook up.
Yeah, in most of these cases, if private water wells have PFAS, so does the public system. But like you said, it's all about generating enough revenue to keep that system going.
The important thing, and this is what's great about having Jesse here, and then we'll see him again at NGWA, is our state associations, with working with Water System Council and working with National Groundwater Association, all of us are better together. And when we can have, a legal scholar into these things, it's very important. And Jesse's here to help and reaching out to the Water System Council. But as we hear these things, we have the power to advocate. And the state of Georgia did it unanimously, bipartisan, was able to pass this law and continue to pass more. So any last thoughts?
Well, I want to just kind of follow up on that. I was at the North Carolina Groundwater Association meeting just a little while ago, and their executive director echoed what Margaret Martins, the executive director of Water Systems Council, and I have been saying over and over. We've been preaching to the choir that really the key cog in this is the state associations. We need strong state associations to protect the water well industry. And luckily we have some. We need more. We need them to be strong. It's tough though. We're talking about full-time water well contractors who in their spare time, if they have any, are volunteering to do this work for the industry. But they are our eyes and ears in the field. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't even know what's happening out there. So we do whatever we can to keep those state associations strong and keep them going.
I think the biggest piece, and this is what's awesome about the Water System Council, our state associations, it's about 11% of our voting population has a private water well, around 14 million water wells. So in reality, you got 89% of the voting population that just turns a faucet on and only knows about a water bill. And being able to have a good, competent contractor that comes in and constructs a water well to the best practices and regulations possible, that homeowner has a water well that's their responsibility, but is isolated from any other situation. And that's what we want to get back to. There is a huge possibility right now in our industry to see an increase in water wells, not a decrease, but it's going to come back to education. It's going to come back to understanding mandatory hookups or understanding the impact of PFAS or Gen X chemicals or these other pieces. And that's where we got to reach out to our state associations, back to Margaret and Jesse, back to the NGWA. The partner states of the Jubilee coming together mid-year really puts us in a good spot going into December and then thinking about what our 2025 looks like. But we talk about these things in December. November 5th is already past us, everybody. So right now, what we're talking about and thinking about is more important than ever on who's representing groundwater for us the best way.
Yep, definitely. Thank you, Brock.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for the Driller Newscast, episode 121.
Yeah, crazy.
This is insane. The Jubilee, again, I came as a kid, and then I was asked to be an intern in the Baberoid booth as I was a water well driller. And it changed my entire career, and now I get to come here and teach. Jesse just dropped some amazing knowledge on us about PFAS and Texas versus New Mexico. I'll tell you what, in the Southeast, we've seen Georgia and Florida go toe-to-toe on groundwater. We've seen Tennessee versus Mississippi. There's plenty of groundwater policy and litigation happening right now. We need to be paying attention to it. Sammy, closing thoughts, remarks about being at the Jubilee.
If you don't attend, you are missing out. This is an opportunity not just to connect and network and learn and grow. This is an opportunity to get your future generations engaged. This is an opportunity to hear from industry professionals. It's an opportunity to talk about the politics and the important lessons and laws and things that are impacting this industry directly. And obviously the products, the show floor, that's all fantastic. But really what it comes down to is this is an opportunity for growth for your business, for your industry, and to be part of the communications directly instead of having to just always watch it on a screen.
I'd like to challenge the rest of the states out there when it comes to the groundwater industry. You know, we have our national conference, and we see the South Atlantic Jubilee partner states come together. We should have a Great Lakes conference. The better together as we look at interstate groundwater and discussions. The Jubilee's done it right and has been for a very long time, from the days of Porky and Carl Mason and Wayne being on the show floor to all the new faces and legends today. You need to be here. Thanks, Sammy.
Absolutely. Thank you.